Right, good day and welcome to part one of our lectures on snakes of Southern Africa. This is going to be a bit of a hodgepodge course. We're going to go over it in a bit of an unorthodox way, but hopefully it'll make sense in the end. And it's involving a lot of ID, some taxonomy, some understanding of the ecology, the biology, myths and legends, misconceptions, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So we will have Q&A questions, sorry, Q&A sessions along the way as well. So if any people have questions they would like to hear answered or things I haven't covered in the lectures, feel free to ask me. You can always send me a message as well, drop a comment, and I will get back to you. Right. So when people think of snakes, they tend to think of this. They tend to think of these garish, awful, demonic creatures out to get them. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Snakes are just animals. They have heads, they have necks, they have bodies, and they're just missing legs. So they're pretty much the same as most other animals, most of the vertebrates on the planet, or walking on this planet or crawling on this planet, and they live and die in the same way. And they're certainly not demonic. They're certainly not devils. There's a lot of mythology out there, but mythology is exactly that. It's mythology, and they're myths and legends that we used to tell each other to explain the world and also to warn us of dangers because, a good story always sells. So, one of the biggest problems with snakes is the misconception that they are extremely dangerous. And looking at the map over here, you can see that there are a significant number of deaths related to snake bites around the world. Sub-Saharan Africa has about 32,000. South Asia has about 33,000 every year. Southeast Asia, 20,000. The Americas combined have less than 5,000. And that might sound a lot. People would say that's a lot of people that die every year. If you take the whole world's population, that's around 100,000 people that die every year from snake bites. And yes, that's true. Anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 fatalities every year. That sounds like a lot. It's not in the greater scheme of things. In North America alone, more than 100,000 people die annually from heart disease from consuming things like McDonald's and drinking. And if you look at road fatalities throughout the world, in 2019, we've got a map of injuries, injuries and fatalities from around the world. And you can see that the number of major accidents around the world that are significant concern are far, far higher than snakes. So if you actually took this into consideration, you're 1,000 to 2,000 more likely to die in a car accident than by snake bite. So when looking at snake diversity, South Africa is spoiled for choice. We have about 170 species, 171, depending on which scientist you're asking, of species of snake throughout Southern Africa. And that sounds like a hell of a lot. And it is. We're quite spoiled, but it's quite nothing compared to Mexico. Mexico is probably, or not probably, it is the snake hotspot on planet Earth. There's 390 species of snake in Mexico. So if you ever want to go herping, go to Mexico. That's where you're going to have your dreams come true. And the reason for this is because it's part of what we call the Great American Interchange. And the Great American Interchange occurred around 3 million years ago when North America and South America connected, and that allowed for species from both the northern continent and the southern continent to overlap with each other, giving that great diversity that Mexico has today. It also is a tropical area, so it supports an abundance of species in that area. But let's go back to South African species. So when it comes to living alongside snakes and appreciating them, understanding is everything. We need to understand that they're just animals. They're not demonic. They're not devils. They have value. They are ecological linchpins. Entire ecosystems live and die by them. And they're a major food source for many creatures, as well as population control experts in their own relative areas. So it's about understanding. We need to have awareness of what we're doing with them, understanding the dangerous species, learning how to avoid them, learning how to be aware of also the non-dangerous species and not harm those species unnecessarily. Understandably, I can see why people will kill a dangerous snake if it's on their property because they're too afraid to remove them the old-fashioned way or by hand. So I can understand why people would kill a dangerous snake, and while I can criticize, I can at least understand. But having an awareness of the different kinds of species will let you know which species are dangerous and which species are not. And also keeping an open mind. And not everything that is cute is valuable. We tend to only value the cute animals, rabbits, hares, cats and dogs. All the cute fluffy stuff tends to be the stuff that we adore and love, and we only see scaly things and smooth skin things as gross and disgusting and slimy. And we need to reinvent or reinvigorate our passion for wildlife. And when we talk about wildlife, we need to understand that we love all wildlife, and the weird and the wonderful alike. So in South Africa, there's about 170 species. And you might say, wow, that is a lot of snakes to worry about. But actually, there's only around 20 species that are considered to be deadly. That's still a lot. We are a subtropical zone, and we do have a lot of species that are rather dangerous. But at the end of the day, only 20 of them really are concerning. That leaves you with 150 species that are of no threat to you whatsoever. So, snakes are reptiles, and they are quite closely related to a lot of other different types of reptiles, and they belong to a group of reptiles called Toxifera, literally means venom bearing. And these guys all are fairly closely related. So you're going to get quite a few different types of reptiles out there. You get geckos, you get skinks, you get iguanas, you get bearded lizards like the Gila monster. You also get anguids, which are weird. We're not going to get into those today. We're going to get the varanadeas, like which are monitor lizards, the legavons, as they call them in South Africa. You're going to get different types of other small snakes. You're going to get the pythons. You're going to get boas. You're going to get vipers and adders, cobras and their relatives, stiletto snakes, which were until very recently lumped in with cobras, and of course the Colubrids, which is a really big group of snakes, the most diverse group of snakes on the planet. And interestingly, we've got two groups of animals that are venomous: bearded lizards like the Gila monster, and these snakes over here all have family members that are venomous to varying degrees. And just when I say venomous, it means that they have some form of venom. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily deadly. Lots of snakes have venom, but for most species, it's so mild that it has no impact on human. But we're going to learn about some of the more deadly species today. So snakes have been around for a very, very long time. In fact, the first records of primitive snakes date back to about 145 million years ago. And we can actually start mapping in the fossil records and also the genetic records, the first appearances of snakes from about the mid to late Triassic, where the true snakes started to first arrive in terms of all their diversity at the end of the Cretaceous, when the dinosaurs started to die out. And that's when we start finding an abundance of snake fossils. So they've been around for quite a long time indeed. One of the first primitive snakes that we know of is Parvoraptor sti. And he was more of a lizard than a snake, but effectively a snake in all but name. He still had vestigial, very, very primitive back legs. And in fact, we find these, what we call pelvic spurs, on some snake species today. Not a lot of snakes have them, but your more primitive species, like your pythons and your boas, still have these pelvic spurs on the back of by the back of their cloaca, by where their tail occurs. And they're very, very apparent. And they do basically form vestigial back legs. Now, snakes in turn, they've got a skeleton just like us, although they've got a cavalcade of ribs running down their body. They've also got all the same organs and all the same different pieces as us. They've got ovaries, oviducts, small intestine, large intestines. They've got lungs, stomach, livers, gallbladders. They've got a brain. They are basically the same as all other animals, with a few little differences, like they're missing their legs. And that benefits them because most snakes tend to be climbing in trees or living subterranean, living underground. Having legs can be a bit of a hindrance in those environments. So they can also be really, really small, like this Barbados thread snake, which is tiny, less than 5 centimeters long, or they can be really, really big, like the largest snake on Earth, the reticulated python. The green anaconda is second place. He's the heaviest snake in the world, but not the biggest snake in the world. The biggest snake in the world is the reticulated python from India and Burma. Now, people online will often post a lot of garbage about things like these snakes over here, absolutely monsters. This is just poor Photoshop. It is absolute garbage. You're wasting your time even clicking on these articles. It is all Photoshopped nonsense. Snakes don't get that big. About 100 million years ago, there were some big whoppers, but there are none alive today. So let's talk about snake families. Snake families are very, very diverse. There's around 4,000 species of snake on the planet, And we include the things like the coral pipe snakes, the file snakes, the dwarf pipe snakes, mole vipers, boas, round island boas, colubrids, Asian pipe snakes, cobras, coral snakes, mambas, sea snakes, and all their relatives, Mexican burrowing snakes, pythons, dwarf boas, shield tail snakes, vipers, adders, pit vipers, and rattlesnakes, sunbeam snakes, dwarf blind snakes, sorry, dwarf blind snakes, slender blind snakes, and a whole bunch of others. But we're not going to learn about all about those guys today. We're going to be learning about some of the South African snakes. Now, this is a rudimentary breakdown of the various families of snakes, but we get we get 5 different groups in South Africa. And we get the Elapids, Viperids, and Colubrids to start off with. And the Elapids include cobras, mambas, stiletto snakes, which have been reclassified, but we're going to lump them in today because it's part of the exercise. Sea snakes, and a few others as well. And of course, with the viperids or the vipers, we get adders and vipers. They're basically the same thing. The word viper comes from live bearing because most species tend to bear live young. They don't lay eggs. There are some exceptions, though. And the colubrids, which is a gigantic group of snakes. And these guys we cannot possibly cover in one lesson, so we're only going to cover a handful of species. But they include house snakes, which aren't venomous, wolf snakes, sand snakes, boomslangs, egg eaters, and a whole bunch more. And we won't possibly get through those today. And many, many more. Colubrids actually belong to what we call a superfamily, and all these particular groups of snakes underneath have been classified into their own families now. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to keep them as one family. Now, we also get the pythons. They're completely non-venomous. There's only one species in South Africa, the Southern African python. You get Anchieta's dwarf python if you head up to Angola and Namibia. And the Typhlopids, which are really weird small snakes, and these include blind snakes and thread snakes. And that's basically it in terms of what snakes we get in South Africa. And that's a big summary right there. We've got 170 species. I've just covered a handful of them. So we want to learn about the venomous snakes. We want to learn about all the nasty stuff out there. That's what starts people's interest in snakes because they are scary for some people. And an understanding of venom is what draws people into an understanding of snakes. So we're going to focus on these 3 families over here, the Elapids, the Viperids, and the Colubrids. Now, of course, the Elapids include the cobras, mambas, stiletto snakes, and sea snakes. Viperids, adders, vipers, Colubrids, house snakes, wolf snakes, sand snakes, and boomslangs, and many more. But let's focus on the Elapids. So Elapids are rather interesting snakes. All South African species are venomous. Most species lay eggs. There are some exceptions. Elapids have short front fixed fangs. That's a mouthful. And many species spread their hoods when they're threatened, including the black mamba. Generally, they're more intelligent than other snakes. That's not saying much. They're not very intelligent. They do rely on external factors to warm up, so they don't have a lot of body. They are cold-blooded, for want of another term, and because of that, their intelligence is not very, very high. Now, most species are neurotoxic. Not all of them, though. Some of them are other types of venoms. Neurotoxic is a type of venom. It affects the nervous system. And we're going to be looking at these basic types of jaw structures and fang structures over here. Now, the first kind are the elapids, and you'll notice that the fangs are at the front of the mouth, which gives these guys nice, short, punchy, biting mouths. And these guys tend to be very fast, active, intercepting snakes, active predators. They hunt down their prey, they chase it down. You also see that they've got a very advanced fang. It's actually like a hypodermic needle, and that allows venom to be injected deep into the body and giving a nice sharp dose of nasty venom. And those fangs are actually covered in skin until the time they actually bite you. And when they bite down on their prey or their aggressor, the fangs sheaths slide back and allow the snake to protect those fangs until the last second, where it actually punctures into the flesh of its target and deliver a healthy dose of venom. Now, snakes can actually control their dosages. They don't deliver one big shotgun blast. They can either give a dry bite. It doesn't happen a lot. Don't bank on it. But they can give a dry bite where they don't want to waste venom. They just want to scare you off. Or they can give you a small dose, or they can give you a really nasty dose. And generally, the consensus is that the younger snakes tend to give greater doses than the older snakes. This is because they have less of a control over their venom glands, and those venom glands basically just deliver one big giant shotgun blast of venom. So with the Elapids, we get quite a few species like the green mamba, the black mamba, the Mozambique spitting cobra, who can actually spray his venom up to 2 or 3 meters. They're not actually neurotoxic, they're cytotoxic, but we'll come to that in a few minutes. Get the Cape cobra, is probably the most beautiful cobra in the world with a variety of colors. We get the runkels, which is a beautiful, very beautiful cobra, also a spitting cobra, and he bears live young. We also get the Cape coral snake, distantly related to cobras, forest cobras, which are really, really big, one of the biggest cobras in Africa, Sandoval's garter snake, which is a beautiful, very placid little snake, still got a nasty bite, and spotted harlequin snakes, and also you get striped harlequin snakes. Snouted cobras, very common up in the Highveld of South Africa, rather aggressive snakes. And if you're swimming in tropical waters, keep your eye open for yellow-bellied sea snakes. They are very rare. You do not see them often. And if you happen to see them on the shoreline, it's usually because they've been washed up because of a storm, and they're probably not doing very well. But often they'll hang out in coral reefs, and these guys have a subclass of neurotoxin called myotoxin. It shuts down the muscles. But we're not going to get too much into the details of that. We also get stiletto snakes, and these guys have a cytotoxin, again, which we're going to talk about later. And stiletto snakes have been reclassified into their own family, but for a very long time, they were lumped in with the Elapids, so we'll keep them there for now because it's a good place to be. So understanding neurotoxins basically comes to an understanding of how the nervous system works. Your nervous system delivers pulses throughout the nerve terminal and the muscle fiber, and if something gets in the way, it's not going to be able to transmit those signals. Now, basically what you're going to have is you're going to have these little transmissions passing between the nerve terminals and the muscle fiber, and the muscle relies on these signals in order to know what to do, to continue breathing, for the heart to function, for all the pulses throughout your body to continue happening, for your eyes to work, your brain to work. That all needs to happen. Now, these things get in the way. Now, different snake venoms can do different kinds of things. They get presynaptic, postsynaptic, dendrotoxins, and all various other kinds, and they'll just basically clog it up in different places. Something like a dendrotoxin is like a black mamba bite, and they tend to get into all the nooks and crannies of the nerve terminal and really just shut it down. You get things like the fasculin, which tend to float in between the nerve terminal and the muscle fiber, and that just basically just clogs it up, stops transmissions from going through. And that basically tells your nerve endings can't send through signals telling your muscles to operate, which means that your heart stops beating, your lungs stop breathing, and you die despite your best efforts. Not to, because at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of electrical impulses run by a very advanced piece of computation. Now, neurotoxic venoms are rather fast. They attack the nervous system, they shut down the heart and the lungs. They're very fast acting. No, they cannot kill you in 30 seconds like the movies. A really, really aggressive bite can maybe do 20 minutes, but a more realistic time is anywhere between 2 hours to 7 hours, with some of the other snakes taking up to 24 hours to kill you. It's generally painless because it affects the nervous system, so you don't really feel it. You might get a bit of numbness, a bit of tingling. You'll start to notice that you might be a bit dizzy, lightheaded. You'll start to notice that you're short in breath, your words will be slurring, and eventually you're going to pass out. Because you're running out of oxygen, you're going to get dizzy, you're going to get giddy, you might start laughing uncontrollably. And all things considered, it's not a bad way to go. It's actually probably a fairly decent way to go, to be quite macabre. Now, the second group that we're going to talk about are the viperids, or the vipers and the adders. It really doesn't matter what you call them. And these guys are really, really cool, but really, really nasty. Now, all species in this group are venomous, and most species give birth to live young. The vipers have long folding front fangs, say that 3 times. South African species tend to be terrestrial, although if you go to the Americas, there are a lot of arboreal species, and throughout Southeast Asia, throughout the islands, there are a lot of arboreal species that live and hunt in trees. But South African species tend to be ambush predators on the ground. Now, they're quite lethargic snakes. They're very lazy, and they'll hide under bushes or along pathways and wait for rodents and other animals to come along. And these guys will just rely on their striking speed to ambush them rather than chasing them down. And most species are cytotoxic, meaning that their venom affects the cells of your body. Not all of venom are cytotoxic, some are neurotoxic, but most species are cytotoxic. Now, these guys have got quite a different type of bite to the Elapids. They've actually got a really long fang. It actually folds and it doesn't fit inside. It basically can punch through the bottom of the jaw if they don't fold it back. That's how long these things are. In the case of a gaboon viper, that fang can be up to 4 centimeters or an inch and a half. Now, these guys also have those wonderful hypodermic needles for fangs, but those fangs can actually uh, hinge backwards and forwards into the mouth, allowing them to have these really nasty, long scimitar-like blades hanging in their mouths, which give them really deep bites. And the reason why they want these bites is so they can deliver a really nasty, deep amount of cytotoxic venom deep into the body, and that can spread throughout the body, doing catastrophic damage to the area. And now this is a nasty, nasty bite, unlike a neurotoxic venom. So neurotoxic venoms tend to be very fast acting, quite potent, shut you down, but it's not a bad way to go. This is quite the opposite. This is agonizing. This is excruciating. This is just an awful, awful, awful bite. And again, these fangs can slide forward, and when they're exposed, they can be really nasty indeed. Now, the Elapids, the Viperids or the vipers include puff adders, rhombic night adders. Sorry, that's meant to be Gamboon viper over there. Berg adders, horned adders, and quite a few other species, but we're not going to get through them. And what will happen is when the actual venom is delivered into the body, the proteins make their way through to the cells and basically bust through the cell membrane, tearing it open. They allow oxidation to enter. They allow for the cells to no longer repair themselves. It becomes anti-angiogenesis, which basically means that the cells cannot repair themselves and they cannot develop. It starts to shut down the cell pathways. It kills the DNA of the cell and leads to apoptosis, which is basically the cell death. So the cell's now dead and it starts to rot very quickly because the bacteria in your body start to eat away at those dead cells and you start to rot. It's a very nasty, nasty, nasty bite. And it can be extremely painful. It's a lot of swelling, a lot of bubbling, a lot of oozing liquids. There's intense fever, intense pain, and eventually necrosis. And it just does catastrophic damage to the body, just dies because of that. It's not a nice way to go. So I warn you now, this is a very nasty picture. So avert your eyes if you don't like to see nasty stuff. But this is what happens when you get bitten by a puff adder. So this is a really nasty case of necrosis. Basically, those cells are dead and the foot is starting to rot off. So you obviously it will work its way through the entire body and eventually the entire body shuts down through this catastrophic damage. But it's one of those bites you certainly want to avoid if you don't want to be playing with snakes. So Colubrids, on the other hand, are pretty interesting. And again, not all Colubrids are venomous. Only a handful are. And of those ones that are venomous, most are not very dangerous. Although we do have a couple real whoppers. And these guys are the most diverse family of snakes. Most species are harmless. A few are deadly. Colubrids have small rear fangs, and they lived in a variety of environments. If you think of an environment in southern Africa or on anywhere on the planet Earth for that matter, except for obviously frozen areas, they won't be found there. But anywhere that they can make a living, they'll make a living for themselves. Most species lay eggs, and most species are hemotoxic in South Africa, which means that they affect the blood. Now, these guys over here tend to have small fangs at the back of their mouths, which means they tend to need to get really deep into their bite to deliver this bite. And these fangs are not very efficient, and often with many snakes, they do deliver a bite, but they don't actually manage to get there and deliver a killing bite. So they tend to hold onto their prey and chew on their prey for quite a while, unlike the other two snakes, groups of snakes, which tend to just deliver a quick zap and get out of there. These snakes will hang on and just chew down on the bite, delivering as much venom as they can before disengaging. And unlike the other two, their actual fangs are quite primitive. There's just a groove that runs on the outside of the fang that allows venom to pass down it. Now, as you can see, if you look at this boomslang's fangs, they're quite far back into the mouth. And again, they are still sheathed, protected, but they can still deliver a nasty bite if they manage to engage with you. But fortunately, most colubrids are quite shy. Now, with your circulatory system throughout your body, you've got blood pumping throughout your system throughout the whole time, and that blood is in a state is a liquid because it's being kept at a particular medium, not too coagulated, not too uncoagulated, because of the chemistry in your body. And your blood is actually is not one whole thing. It's a composite of different components and includes plasma. You've got your cells like your leukocytes and your erythrocytes, your white blood cells and red blood cells. Plasma has got platelets in it, which help basically keep it running at a certain medium of liquidity. And they can also form a binding agent if you have a cut or if you have bruises or breakages. Those platelets help form clots. And this is where the hemotoxic venom comes in. So your body's or your blood is in a constant state of coagulation. It needs to have enough anticoagulants and enough procoagulants to keep it liquid. If it becomes too liquid, if it has too many coagulants, then it becomes extremely gelatinous. And if it has too many anticoagulants, then it becomes extremely watery, and basically you just bleed out of every pore in your body. So it's got these two working in constant unison the whole time, keeping themselves balanced. Now, if you introduce a dose of hemotoxic venom, all of a sudden the procoagulation is increased exponentially, while it's discouraged to form any anticoagulants. So this tends to bind up and becomes very viscous and very sticky. It binds together, just like what happens when you have blood drying around a scab. So it starts to coagulate together and become really, really clumpy and really, really sticky. And that's what it starts to form inside the body. It forms a big, thick jelly. And of course, your body can't pump this, and your body dies of cardiac arrest. Things shut down. You might have aneurysms. It has a whole bunch of side effects that can be very, very efficient at killing an animal. Now, if you're something like a rat or a mouse, what this does is basically turns your whole body to jelly on the inside. Because there's not a lot of blood going around. However, if you're a human being, what this does is it forms all those platelets inside the body to coagulate in little clumps. So you have large amounts of plasma that's extremely watery with little clumps of platelets that are distributed throughout the body that are all clogged up. So you tend to get this hemorrhaging occurring throughout the body where you start to bleed internally. And basically, if you can think of a part of your body where blood can come out of, be it sweat glands, tear ducts, your excretion glands, wherever excretion organs, wherever you can think of, blood comes out of those areas because your body has no ability to control that. And you can start crying blood. It is a really nasty, nasty, nasty bite. Russell's viper from India and Sri Lanka delivers a hemotoxic bite. So these hemotoxic venoms are rather nasty, and some can be painless, some can be extremely painful, but they involve localized swelling, not too much, maybe a little bit of mild swelling, profuse bleeding from the site, lethargy and headaches. You're going to feel sluggish and drowsy and headachy, and there's going to be localized and general pain, very stiff around the joints. You're going to have heart issues. You're going to have issues breathing. You're just going to have a really unpleasant time. But it takes a long time to kill humans. And fortunately, it takes anywhere between 2 days to 3 days to kill a human being. So amongst our more dangerous hemotoxic snakes, we get boomslangs and vine snakes. Now, bear in mind, boomslangs come in a variety of different colors. So we don't tend to focus on the color of a boomslang. We're going to get into boomslang ID later to actually learn how to identify boomslangs from other snakes, because they're not all green and they're not all brown. They can be blue, they can be green, they can be brown, they can be black, they can be yellow. Boomslangs can be very confusing. Vine snakes, or twig snakes as they're otherwise known, are very deceptive, very well camouflaged, but they fortunately look all the same throughout South Africa. You also get other snakes which are harmless, keyword harmless, venomous but harmless, short-snouted whip snakes and their cousins. You get other species like the red-lipped herald, also harmless. If you get bitten by one of these guys, it's no worse than a mild swelling around the site and maybe a little bit of localized extra bleeding. Then I tell black snakes, which are very, very shy and elusive. You also get spotted scarpstekers. Scarpsteker means the sheep stabber, because farmers used to think they used to bite and kill their sheep. That is not true. These guys don't have enough of a bite to kill a mouse. And marble tree snakes, which are absolutely beautiful little snakes. And of course, eastern tiger snakes, or common tiger snakes, as they're otherwise known of, one of the most beautiful snakes in South Africa. All these species, by the way, are harmless. And of course, the black-headed centipede eater, also harmless, but mildly hemotoxic. So all these species over here, apart from the boomslang and the vine snake, are considered to be venomous. However, the venom is so mild, it has no impact on humans, and you don't need to worry about it. If you get bitten, you don't have to worry about going to the doctor. So hopefully that covers a few little bits of information about snakes in Southern Africa. This is part one. Next week, we're going to get into the first beginnings of identification. I hope that you guys enjoyed this little ramble. I will make sure not to make any mistakes on the presentation slides next time. And thank you very much for joining my little lecture. Leave a comment if you are interested in having any questions answered.